He was born in Columbus, Ohio, just 50 miles from the Wright brothers' shop in Dayton. He saw his first airplane at the age of 4. It fascinated him, and he ran to catch it, but it was gone. From then on, he was fascinated by flight and continued to chase it. After college, he joined the Army and became a pilot. The chase that began at age 4 was fulfilled. And for the next 40 years, aviation would bring him fame and achievement through a long and glorious career. He was always the best bombardier, best navigator, and best pilot in his unit. He developed the tactics to win wars from the air, then led the way as the Army Air Forces smashed Germany, then Japan on their way to victory in World War II. When the Soviets became a menace, he thwarted them by first organizing the Berlin airlift, then developing the Strategic Air Command into the world's premier nuclear deterrent bomber and missile force, dedicated to the preservation of peace, a peace that lasted for over 40 years. His name is Curtis Emerson LeMay, and he is a legend of air power. Curtis LeMay was born November 15, 1906, to Irving and Arizona LeMay. His father was a steel worker and sometimes handyman who often was forced to move his family in search of work. Their travels carried them from Ohio to Pennsylvania to Montana to California and back again. While in California, young Curtis and the rest of his family visited the Panama Pacific International Exposition in San Francisco. Young Curtis saw aeronaut Lincoln Beachley do aerobatics over the crowds, and he wondered just what it was like up there, a wonder he would never lose. LeMay graduated from Ohio State University in 1928 with an engineering degree. He also finished ROTC as an honor graduate and received a reserve commission in the Army. Unfortunately, the reserve commission didn't help land him in flight school. He worked hard to enter flight training as an aviation cadet at Kelly Field, Texas. His first tour of duty was with the 27th Pursuit Squadron at Selfridge Field, Michigan, where he received his regular commission in February 1930. At Selfridge, LeMay flew the Curtiss P-1. He stayed at Selfridge until 1937, when he transferred to Boeing B-17 bombers at Langley Field, Virginia. In February 1938, Lieutenant Curtis LeMay was lead navigator when the Air Corps demonstrated the long-range capability of its new B-17. 6 bombers of the 2nd Bombardment Group made a goodwill flight from Langley Field, Virginia to Buenos Aires, Argentina, and back. General Hap Arnold awarded the group the McKay Trophy for the most meritorious flight of 1938, and LeMay was there. Just 2 months later, 3 B-17s of the 2nd Bombardment Group intercepted the Italian liner Rex 725 miles out, headed for New York City. The Air Corps demonstrated that it could intercept an enemy fleet threatening the United States at vast distances, long before they became a threat. Once again, the lead navigator was Lieutenant LeMay. Just prior to World War II, LeMay, assigned to Ferry Command, pioneered ferry air routes over the South Atlantic to Africa and over the North Atlantic to England, routes that would be used constantly once the war began. LeMay then took over the 305th Bombardment Group, trained them in California, and took them to England in the fall of 1942. He gained the reputation as a tough commander, the Iron Eagle. But no matter how tough, he was fair and made sure his crews were well taken care of. LeMay once commented, "I don't mind being called tough. In this racket, it's the tough guys who lead the survivors."
Curtis LeMay was an individual who had very high standards that he held himself to, and he held the people that worked for him to. He was fair. He was uncompromising in his pursuit of quality, in his pursuit of performance. He had a reputation for being abrupt. He was a man who was very performance-driven and very goal-oriented and very results-oriented. He was uncompromising in the way that he viewed his own performance and the performance of those who worked for him.
He trained his crews hard and prepared them well, and through them he developed new formation tactics. These tactics greatly improved defensive protection for the bombers from fighter attack. The tactics also improved the group's bombing accuracy and effectiveness.
I found that bombing accuracy was very poor. As a matter of fact, we didn't know where half the bombs we hauled across the channel fell. And further investigation showed that everyone was taking evasive action on the bombing run. So it was apparent that the bombardiers were not having an opportunity to use their equipment and get good results. So in our stupidity, we decided to make a straight-in run from the time we saw the target.
His bombers flew as an 18-aircraft combat box for mutual protection. They all dropped their bombs when leads were dropped, so that the bombs fell in a tight grouping, known as synchronous bombing. LeMay's tactics were adopted by all groups in all theaters of operation. He excelled as a combat leader, prompting General Ira Aker to say of LeMay, "He may not be human, but when I can find 100 other group commanders like him, we'll get on with this war. We might even win it." LeMay was quickly promoted to 4th Bombardment Wing Commander, and in August 1943, he planned and led the famous shuttle mission from England to Africa, in which they bombed the Messerschmitt airplane factory at Regensburg, Germany. Other bombers in the attack hit the ball bearing factories at Schweinfurt. Successful, the mission lost 60 bombers and another 100 were damaged. A month later, LeMay became the 3rd Bombardment Division commander, making him the youngest Major General in the Army. His next move came in August 1944, when General Arnold selected LeMay to command the 20th Bomber Command in India. It was time to take the war to mainland Japan, and LeMay planned to do it with the new Boeing B-29 Superfortress. As action began to taper off in the China-Burma theater, LeMay was appointed commander of the Marianas-based 21st Bomber Command in January 1945. The B-29s could now hit mainland Japan with relative ease. From his headquarters on Guam, LeMay directed the bombing campaign. Initially, LeMay used the European tactic of high-altitude flights with high-explosive bombs against targets in Japan. Then, in an effort to shorten the war, he changed tactics. Realizing that Japanese construction was primarily wood, he sent his bombers in between 5,000 and 7,000 feet with incendiary bombs. The results were catastrophic for the Japanese, as many of Japan's major cities were consumed by fire. Unbelievably, the fires did not bring the unconditional surrender intended. President Truman gave the order to use the atomic bomb. On August 6, 1945, the Enola Gay, a B-29 from the 509th Bomb Group at Tinian, dropped its 9,000-pound Little Boy on Hiroshima. After a visit with LeMay, General Carl Spaatz telegraphed Washington, "Have had opportunity to check up on Baker 2-9 operations and believe this is the best organized and most technically proficient military organization the world has seen to date." Just 3 days later, a second bomb was dropped, this time on Nagasaki. On August 15th, the war was over. The bombers of LeMay's command had helped bring it about. Major General LeMay became the first Deputy Chief of Air Staff for Research and Development at Air Force Headquarters in Washington in December 1945. He was in charge of nuclear weapons development and wasted no time in planning the weapons testing in the Marshall Islands Bikini Atoll. LeMay was promoted to Lieutenant General in October 1947 and assigned as Commanding General for U.S. Air Forces in Europe. In April 1948, the Soviets began to restrict the flow of supplies to Berlin, prompting General Lucius Clay, the commander of European Command, to ask LeMay if he could deliver coal by air. LeMay responded, "Sir, the Air Force can deliver anything." LeMay immediately began Little Lift from Rhine, Maine, West Germany, to deliver U.S. Army rations and perishables like fresh milk, eggs, and vegetables daily into Tempelhof Aerodrome Field in Berlin. LeMay organized the air operation and ordered more modern aircraft. Until they arrived, he had to rely on the 96 Douglas C-47s already assigned to Germany. Then on June 26th, the Soviets closed the city completely, except for the air corridors. The Berlin airlift began. With the airlift flowing efficiently, LeMay returned to the United States, was promoted to general, and assumed command of the newly formed Strategic Air Command. He established its headquarters at Offutt Air Force Base, Nebraska. He transformed the command from the remnants of World War II bombers, primarily the B-29 Super Fortress and the larger consolidated B-36 Peacemaker intercontinental bomber, to an all-jet bomber force, comprised of the sleek Boeing B-47 Stratojet and the awesome Boeing B-52 Stratofortress, manned and supported by professional airmen dedicated to the preservation of peace. As the new Boeing bombers came into service, LeMay quickly checked out in both the B-47 and the B-52. General LeMay commanded the Strategic Air Command for nearly 9 years. He was uniquely identified with SAC and its progress, and also with the welfare of its people. He realized that by demanding high standards of readiness, the command exacted a human toll on its people. Being a strong family man, General LeMay had a great concern for his men and their families' welfare, and over the years was responsible for greatly improved living conditions on SAC bases for both married and unmarried personnel.
I think a measure of Curtis LeMay's devotion to his people is how he was concerned about them in their off flying hours. He was an enthusiastic sportsman. He encouraged the development of recreation centers. He developed a particular interest in road racing and road rallies, and that was a feature, really, of the LeMay era. And then he was very concerned about the welfare of his people, particularly his enlisted force, and put a great deal of time and effort into the Cape Cod housing program and developing appropriate housing and recreation facilities for them. He was a genuine total force person.
Under LeMay's leadership and supervision, SAC laid the plans for the development and integration of an intercontinental ballistic missile capability to complement the manned bomber. In July 1957, LeMay became the Vice Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force. But even as Vice Chief of Staff, General LeMay continued to set records. In November of 1957, he flew a new Boeing KC-135 jet tanker on 2 record-setting non-stop flights between the United States and Buenos Aires, Argentina, and return. Then, in 1961, LeMay replaced General Thomas D. White and was named the 5th Chief of Staff of the Air Force, a post he held until his retirement in January 1965.
I think historians will forever debate which of the 2 major events in LeMay's career was the more significant. In a combat sense, I think his decision to restructure and redirect the B-29 raids against Japan to adopt a low-level, night bombing, incendiary bombing approach, which of course radically transformed the success of the B-29 campaign. And then the second case is in the post-World War II era, where he radically transformed SAC. He took a look at Strategic Air Command, did not like what he saw in the post-World War II era, saw an organization that he felt had morale problems, had mission problems, had lost its edge, and he determined to build that force into the premier power projection force for the United States, and indeed he did so.
As Chief of Staff, General LeMay remained committed to the welfare and professionalism of the men and women of the Air Force.
He was a happy blend of a guy who didn't have to be a martinet to get absolute loyalty from those who served under him, which is the ultimate accolade of a military commander, or of any kind of commander for that matter. He gets pretty high marks as a human being. You know, he was a cigar-chomping, rough, tough, gruff Kurt LeMay. And over the years, this mystique grew up about him as if he were some sort of ogre, you know, with the crushed cap squared over his eyes and thunderbolting everyone around him. Well, not really. You know, the beauty of him was that he had that effect in terms of what he got out of his troops. But he didn't actually hurl the thunderbolts. You know, it's kind of a strange sort of thing. He got the kind of loyalty that a guy, you know, you would expect a commander to get if he'd intimidated his troops, but he never did intimidate them.
He also remained the chief advocate of the policy for the continued mix of strategic manned bombers and intercontinental ballistic missiles as the nation's primary deterrent to nuclear attack, when the administration pressed for a change in that policy. After his retirement, he continued to be a strong supporter of the Air Force and the welfare of its people.
Being born in 1906, right after the airplane first flew, my history is the history of the airplane. And you know as well as I do that any way you measure it, speed, performance of any kind, the curve for the air art is going just like that. And what's going to happen in the future is going to happen so rapidly that if you don't keep abreast, you're really lost.
His concern over declines in national defense capabilities and the ongoing war in Vietnam prompted the general to join George Wallace as his vice presidential running mate in the 1972 presidential race. In 1987, the General and Mrs. Curtis E. LeMay Foundation was set up by the general and his wife to provide assistance to indigent widows of retired Air Force officers and enlisted retirees. General LeMay died in 1990, but his legacy lives on. He changed forever the way nations use bombers as an offensive weapon during war and as a source of deterrence against attack during times of peace. His creation of the Strategic Air Command as a deterrent to nuclear attack during the Cold War helped defeat the Soviet Union and brought peace and an end to the threat of nuclear annihilation. Although he is remembered for his tough, war-winning leadership, his legacy is one of peace. And for that, he is a true legend of air power.